Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Hey, I have a repeat guest, if you will, but man, let me tell you, this brother brought the fire last time, so I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. I have Matthew Kincaid, author of Freedom Teaching, Overcoming Racism in Education to Create Classrooms where all students succeed, which just published as of January 24th, 2024. Absolutely. So folks, make sure you grab yourself a copy. Of course, there will be links in the show notes. So without further ado, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me again. Really enjoyed the last time we got to have a conversation and very much looking forward to today as well.
All right, let's do it. So we're going to have a conversation, a little bit about freedom teaching, and then also we're going to really hone in on cognitive empowerment. But before we get into that topic, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Absolutely. So as was mentioned, my name is Matthew Kincaid. I am a former classroom educator and school administrator, but I currently occupy the role of CEO of my organization, Overcoming Racism, which I founded in 2016. Overcoming Racism provides comprehensive race and equity support to schools, colleges, corporations, healthcare spaces, nonprofits, anyone who wants to see systems level change. That is the work that we do.
Dope. All right. Well, and where did you say you're based out of?
Out of the organization in New Orleans. I'm currently in Michigan right now. But our organization is have staff across the country, kind of a decentralized model.
All right. I want to be like you when I grew up then. So just want to have a team all over nations like that. So that's what's up. Goals.
Be careful what you wish for.
Okay. All right, let's get into today's topic. So the title of your book is called Freedom Teaching. I want to start there, and then I want to get into some of the pieces that I came across within your book. So why don't you start us off? What do we mean by freedom teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Titling a book is perhaps one of the most challenging things that you can do in the entire process. And so we came to the name Freedom Teaching because it really encapsulated what the book is about. And so we believe that freedom teaching are deliberate acts that enhance the freedom of children, both inside of the classrooms, but then also the freedom that they have to lead choice-filled lives. One of the things that systemic racism, classism, or oppression more broadly limits for children is their choices. In society, the privileges we have significantly dictate the choices we can make. For some families, they can choose what they eat every night for dinner and whether or not that's nutritious. They can choose whether or not they send their kid to a high achieving school. They can choose whether or not they live in a safe community. They can choose what type of access to healthcare they have. For many other people, as a consequence of these systems of oppression, those choices are much more limited, or in some cases, a person may feel like they don't have choices at all. And what we found in our work in schools is that, especially in urban communities, oftentimes freedom is de-emphasized, and children find themselves in school spaces that are more so about control. And so we thought, how can we educate kids in ways that deliberately enhance their freedom in schools? And as a consequence of that, deliberately enhances the freedom that they have as they have to navigate the systems of the world. And so that's what freedom teaching is: deliberate actions that enhance the freedom of children.
So is this book for students, or is this more for educators?
More so for educators. Also, we've gotten a lot of feedback that is great for parents as well. A lot of the kind of philosophies that are represented in the book also can be really beneficial for parents. So pretty much anyone who is in the action of working to raise children. And I believe that one of the goals of education should be to also that we're helping to raise children well. And so anyone who is a steward of children, the book should have something for them.
I like that. I wanted to clarify that because when I'm listening to you explain it as far as like what does like freedom teaching, I start thinking about like, okay, are we teaching our students to be able to kind of do their, be themselves or are we encouraging our educators or our parents, I guess, to have them make sure that they are able to express themselves in the way that they want? Is that the freedom that we're talking about?
A little bit, right? I think one of the things that the book talks about is that oftentimes in the context of the United States, we think about freedom as this solely individualistic ideal, right? In the United States, we talk a lot about things like rugged individualism and pulling oneself up by their bootstraps. And schooling structures oftentimes follow this model. The model is more or less about, hey, you go to school, you get an education, so one day you can be successful and you can take better care of your family. But when it comes to communities of color and traditionally oppressed communities, freedom has always been an ideal that is shared. And so the book talks a lot about how we can build community in school, how we can build solidarity in school, how students understand that the students in the classroom in a lot of ways are the first part of their network that they're going to continue to be building as they grow and get older. And instead of students thinking about education being solely an individualistic pursuit, the success of the student to my right and to my left also impacts my success. And so how can we build schools that are more so communities? Book Freedom Teaching kind of breaks that down as well. And so students don't feel like they're on an island on a school, but instead students feel like they're part of a team or a family.
I love this. So that they feel like they're part of a team, part of a family. And I think that's really important. So there's a piece that's really stood out to me within the book, and it's all about cognitive empowerment. So I wanted to really hone in on that today, as far as what does that look like? Obviously, we want folks to, you're going to give us the Cliff Notes version. We want folks to really dig into it. But you can kind of just break that down a little bit for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. The book, one of the major inputs of what we believe freedom teaching is promoting schools or creating schools and classrooms where students are cognitively empowered. We talk a lot in schools about whether a kid is a high level learner or a low level learner, or what their reading level is, or what their MAP test score is. We talk a lot about students from this perspective of quote unquote, how smart they are. And oftentimes a young person's smarts is defined by this kind of dominant culture or Eurocentric lens. We don't think about the cultural wealth that students bring into the classroom. We don't think about the knowledges, the funds of knowledges from home that students bring to the classroom. Oftentimes that's a currency that our kids have that is just not valued or accepted in schools. And cognitive empowerment is more so about this idea that every kid is smart. It's about whether or not we recognize the multiple different types of genius that young people bring into classrooms. Every kid's genius is not going to be represented in filling bubbles in on a Scantron. And for kids that are really great at that, that's phenomenal. And I'm not, anti-Scantron, but I'm just saying that school has a responsibility to meet children where they are. And so cognitive empowerment is about building schools in which we teach kids to be critical thinkers, building schools where we teach students about not just what they know or what they're learning, but how that's relevant to their lived experience, how that's relevant to the choices that they'll have to make to lead a successful life. Teaching cognitive empowerment is about working to build students who take risks, students who question, students who are creative and innovative in terms of problem solving, right? Because oftentimes school becomes this compliance task. It's like I show up. I mean, even for the most successful students in classes, especially in urban schools, it's like our expectation for them is show up, sit down, be quiet, write down what the teacher takes on the board, retain as much of it as you possibly can, regurgitate it on a test. And if you can do that, check, you're successful. What does it have to do with you being financially literate? What does it have to do with you understanding the nuances of the structures that exist in society? What does it have to do with you being able to interpret which sources of information are quality sources of information and trustworthy and which ones aren't? What does it have to do with you navigating a conflict you may have in a relationship with a parent or a peer? There are all these soft skills that make up the ecosystem of a school. And so students who are cognitively empowered apply their learning to their lived experience versus just, learning being this kind of competition about who can play the game best enough to then eventually get into a college. And then maybe 4 years after you get into that college, you'll graduate. And then once you graduate, then, your whole entire life will change. I think that's a value proposition for kids that, especially in today's day and age where they have literally the entire world at their fingertips as a means of their cell phone. I just think it's an outdated value proposition of school. If we can't make school meaningful and relevant to kids' lived experiences right now, we're going to lose them. Because whatever's happening on TikTok, I guarantee is more interesting than what is happening in most of our classrooms.
So you're kind of touching on what my follow-up question was going to be as far as the benefits, because I could see people pushing back. Oh, this is not what school is supposed to be like, and this is not how I was brought up. This is not what it was like for me when I was in 3rd grade or 4th grade. So when you get that pushback, because I'm assuming that folks that are listening, they're in these spaces where, oh, this is a radical ideas and you're hating, this is critical race theory, all this type of stuff that's going to get thrown at you. What are some of the benefits, or what are maybe some ways that we can say, you know what, let's look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I just believe that what the book is promoting is just good teaching practice. We can put whatever fancy names we want around it, culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally sustaining this. Like at the end of the day, this is just good teaching practice. Yeah. And I'm not asking that you take my word for that. I'm asking that we just follow the data. The data says that students who are in classrooms that affirm and enrich their culture, classrooms that are based on their assets instead of their deficits, especially classrooms that teach them about the history and cultural traditions of their race and ethnicity that help to build racial pride in students who may not naturally have that because of the systems that exist in our society, oftentimes not shining a bright light on cultures of many communities of color, that these students persist in school longer, that these students engage in, these students have less discipline infractions. These students tend to do better in math and ELA. And in addition to that, that these students oftentimes engage better with people who are different from them. A lot of the pushback in this work is really just fear mongering. And the fear mongering is really centered around the idea that maybe, just maybe, one day we can build a school system in which children of color can go to a school system that is similar to the school system that white children exist in which they get to learn about the intellectual contributions of people that look like them to the tapestry that is education and the learning space. And, when people are saying things like, well, this isn't the way the schools were, right. Many of the things that are being promoted in these books are already happening in schools that predominantly serve white children. And for anyone who suggests that change is bad, well, I mean, we've literally never had an education system that's worked the same way for children of color that is worked for their white counterparts. And so if our education system as it exists now is fundamentally broken, if one of the best indicators of a student's eventual SAT or ACT score is the zip code they're born into, then that's telling us that we have to make change. And for people who are satisfied with the status quo, well, the system must be working for your kids. But for kids that look like me, the system has not been working. And so we are going to be using the data-backed methods to make it work. And in the meantime, we're going to be building up kids who can feel like they have agency in their lives to, shift and change these systems as well.
Well, everything that you're saying makes sense. And when I do similar work, so it makes sense to me. I can hear some of the folks that are probably listening to this. They may work in suburban areas and they may say, oh, so I can go ahead and listen to another podcast because that doesn't apply to me because I don't work in an urban school or inner city schools, all the coded language. And right, so they'll say, oh, I only have 4 Black kids in our school, or I don't even have any Black kids. We have a lot of Latinx, or we got something else. You know what I'm saying? So what kind of message can we give as far as the benefits to the cognitive empowerment, all of that, if you don't work in a urban inner city school?
Yeah, definitely recommend those folks pick up the book. The book actually very explicitly addresses the benefits of this for children of all races. One, as far as, when I use the term people of color, I'm not specifically talking about Black children. And so obviously, there are examples that speak to children of all races, but also specifically children who are white. I think that if you look at our education rates compared to the world globally, the United States is not, near the top, especially for similarly resourced countries, right? And so this notion of, instead of education being solely predicated on this deficit-based, factory-based learning structure where it's teacher has knowledge, teacher inserts knowledge into child now has knowledge. We instead recognize that education is more effective when it is done with children instead of to children, and that children are not coming into our spaces as empty vessels needing to be filled, but instead they're coming into our spaces with all kinds of knowledges. And like I said, even more so now that they have such close access to technology. And so how can we create a relationship where students are cognitively empowered? In the book, we use this example of, imagine if you hired a personal trainer and they're like, meet me in the gym 3 days a week. And the very first time you meet them in the gym, they just lift weights in front of you. And you're like, that's weird, but maybe those just the introductory teach me the exercises. And you keep going back and you keep going back. And every time you go, you never touch a weight, you never touch a machine. Your personal trainer just keeps lifting weights before you and in front of you. And at the end of the month, they're like, this is what my fee is. Well, all of us will leave that personal trainer. All of us would think that will be a ripoff because we know we can't get stronger just by watching someone else lift weights. But in our school systems, not just school systems serving children of color, school systems serving white children as well, that is what education looks like in a lot of spaces. Teachers are doing all the heavy lifting. Teachers are doing all the intellectual prep. Teachers are all doing all the work around investment. And students are just sitting there watching teachers, perform this performance rather than students also being a part of making meaning the knowledge that they're learning, teachers teaching other students in the classroom, teachers being an active participant in education. But additionally, teachers who serve school districts that are predominantly white are still sending their children off into a diverse world. In some ways, it might be even more important for those teachers to understand the nuances of how exposing children to culture and identity is critically important to making them equipped to navigate not just the diversity of the United States, but the fact that we're existing in a global economy. In the next 20 years, the majority of people of color, the majority of people in this country will be people of color. The majority of the workforce will be people of color. In the next 30 years, majority of people in this country are going to be people of color, if not sooner than that. The ability to navigate diverse spaces will be as important of a skill as the ability to read, write, and compute well. And so we're doing white students a significant disservice by not preparing them for this diverse world. And a lot of the fervor and fear around critical race theory, we don't talk about how that hurts white communities as well. They're not just banning books in our schools, they're banning books in your schools. They're not just taking math books out of the curriculum in Florida schools that serve Black and brown kids. They're taking those math books out of the curriculum in schools that serve white children as well. And if there's anything that we should protect, it is our ability for our students to learn and question and be exposed to different types of knowledges and to make their own opinions about it. By no means should anyone feel like they can opt out of this conversation because, like I said, this is just best teaching practice. And there's something for everyone to glean as we talk about, how to make schools work for all kids. That's why that is literally in the title. We can create schools where all students succeed. That's a big part of it.
I love that. And I think what you said really hits home. It makes a lot of sense because you talked about the importance of just realizing like whatever you're banning from us, if you think you're doing something to us, you're also doing it to the other schools. And the reality of it is, at the end of the day, when our students become adults, when they enter into the workforce, more than likely they're going to end up working in some sort of a group setting. So that's why I'm always been a supporter of a project-based learning and PBL, those kind of things. I think it's so important because if we're really trying to prepare our kids for the future outside of K-12 organizations and things like that, then we need to make sure that they're ready to work in diverse spaces. Even I live in Idaho, but even in Idaho, there's a high likelihood that they're going to be around individuals of all different types of diversity. It doesn't necessarily have to be limited to race, but there's going to be different factors, different identities present, and they need to be able to work and understand how to develop those relationships so that they can be successful and be able to make that money and keep those bills paid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes because we look at schools in urban communities, we look at predominantly Black schools, where the case may be, and we see, some of the test scores that are coming out of these districts, and we see lack of investment and funding that is taking place in these districts. You can look at those spaces and say, like, that's on fire. And so we look at their counterparts in even many suburban communities. We're still not reaching this level of excellence that all children deserve and are, quite frankly, capable of. And so just because no one is talking about it doesn't mean that it's not an issue. And the educational practices that are outdated in urban communities are also outdated in, these predominantly white communities as well. And the book talks about radical change, and the word radical gets a bad rap. It's like, oh, that person's a radical. You have to be careful, stay away from them. If you look at the synonyms to the word radical just means complete. Radical means root and branch. And so when we talk about radical change in education, we just want the change to be thorough. We want the change to be complete. The reason why educators all over the country are burning out is because they are busting their tails, giving their all in a system that is not designed for all the children in that structure to succeed. In a lot of ways, it's like a weed out structure where it's like, well, if the kid works hard enough, they'll make it. But the data even bears out that that's not necessarily true in all spaces. And so, the book is really about how can we make schools work? How can we not just accept mediocre? And do we want to close gaps in opportunity and gaps in achievement? Of course we do. But we want to do that in a way that isn't about just making children of color think, act, behave, assimilate better into white spaces. We want to do that in a way in which all children are educated in an education system that says you all have a say in the society that you both inherit, but more importantly, in the society that you all help to create. And so we don't have to keep doing things the same way generation after generation. But one of the reasons why we're working with the younger generation is because they have agency in terms of what type of society they want to create. and we should give them the tools to create a society that's better than the one that we're existing in right now.
Well, I tell you what, every time you come on this show, you be dropping bars.
Hey man, I think it's you, man. You just you inspire me to just, let it rip, So I appreciate the platform and the space, and you've created this, safe space for people to come and talk about these real issues, and so I'm grateful for that.
Everything you said is gold today, and folks, please share this episode, and like I said, grab yourself a copy of Freedom Teaching, because I think it's really important that we really understand that what has been happening over the last generation. I always say back to Industrial Revolution. That's what our foundation of our educational system is. I'm currently teaching a course at the university here, and it's about the history of education. It just reminds me of this wasn't built for us at all. It wasn't. It was not even close. It was built for white men, wealthy white men, but we still utilize the same structure. And so, just hearing what you're saying, to me, it just makes so much sense. If we're really trying to be, caught up with what's happening in 2024 versus the late 1800s, then I think it just makes so much more sense. So thank you so much for bringing that heat today, man.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. And as always, if there's another opportunity to speak, I would love to come back. So thank you all for listening. Thanks for the support with the book. And feel free to reach out to us. You can find us on Instagram at Overcoming Racism, or if you go to overcomingracism.com, you can both find information on the book, but also the work that we do in institutions across the country. So thank you all for listening.
Yep. And again, I'll leave links in the show notes, folks. So all that information will be there. Thank you, Matthew. It has truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you as well.